Welcome everyone to the story week 20 and we're looking at the book of Esther. There's a couple of beautiful phrases that come out of the story of Esther and how Jesus can turn your mourning, your grieving into joy and dancing again. And there's a line in there that says, God has called you for such a time as this. And I believe that God's people, you and I, have been called, have been placed where we are for such a time as this. I was asked to do a book review for the Others magazine, and people that know me know that I don't read too many books other than the Bible. I'm a bit ordinary like that, but I've read a book, and the book was Walking You Home by Phoebe Chan. And for some of you that know the story, Phoebe Chan was a beautiful young lady, and she married Andrew Chan, and she did a great prison ministry and journey with him. And it's a story of her life, the journey with Andrew, and the loss and grief, and how God has brought her through that. And I'm inspired by the book. I spent most of the book in some tears, a little bit personal, but of a humble, kind, faithful, beautiful young woman who has impacted the world for Jesus, and God has taken a great sorrow and turned it into joy. And then there's another book, another amazing young lady in the Bible, in the book of Esther, where God used a beautiful, kind, humble, faithful young woman to save God's people. There's a bit of a funny saying they say, don't underestimate being where you are supposed to be. There's a whole generation of God's people who were saved because Esther made dinner. And if you read the story, you'll probably understand that a little bit more. But I just want to give you a summary of the story, a little bit of the story, and then there's some gold nuggets in there that we can learn, from. And so first of all, I want to summarize your story. First of all, King Xerxes is now in power. God's people are scattered all throughout the different provinces and countries, and God's people are at an absolute all-time low. King Xerxes is a ruthless leader. He doesn't really care what he does, whatever he does. He's not God-honoring. And so much so that he orders a banquet. He's showing off in front of all his friends, and he calls for the princess, his wife, and she doesn't come. She disobeys the king. And in front of everyone, he decides to banish her and get rid of her and get a new queen. Obviously, that's not a very way of marriage, but back in the day, that was just this ruthlessness. And so basically, he banishes her, and then he's in search for a new queen. And then we pick up the story, and there's Mordecai, an amazing godly man, and he has a brother, and his brother's wife sadly passed away, and they have a daughter called Esther, and he brings Esther as his own. And it's a beautiful story. He brings her up as his own. Now Esther has grown up, she's beautiful, and fair enough, she gets chosen to be potentially one of the king's wives. And they go into, get this, it's pretty crazy, they go into 12 months of beauty therapy in order to be prepared, in order to present themselves before the king. This gives the Kardashians beauty treatment a run for their money, but you get this sense there's this king in search for a new princess, and it just so happens that Mordecai's beautiful stepdaughter or daughter has been chosen. Now Esther is a Jew, and Mordecai tells her, do not tell anyone that you're from the Jewish people. Anyway, and so long story short, what happens is eventually she gets chosen to be the queen. Okay. And so what happens also is that Mordecai is a sort of a loving father. He always walking past the palace just to check on her, and he happens to hear an assassination plot to kill the king. So basically he tells Esther tells the king's life is saved, the people who tried to kill him get killed, but nothing happens. But just remember that part of the story. Also, what happens in the story is a guy called Haman. So we can say Haman is probably an easy one, but Haman is second in charge, and he has so much power. The king's just living it up, but he has so much power and so arrogant and prideful, and he makes people bow down to him as a sign of who he is. But Mordecai never bows down, and it infuriates him. So here we have Haman thinking, how am I going to kill this man? And not only do I want to kill this man, I want to kill and wipe out his people. So it's a pretty intense sort of guy, as you can imagine. Anyway, so this is what happens, and he organizes this plot to kill Mordecai and all these people, and he works it out, and he gets the king to sign off, and basically on the 13th of December, they're going to kill all the Jews. Now what happens is Mordecai and Esther find out about this. But what happens is, first of all, Mordecai finds out, and he's wailing, and he's tearing his clothes back in the day in very public or whatever. And Esther comes out and goes, what's going on? And he says, Mordecai tells her that, they're going to kill all the Jews, and what are we going to do? And he says to Esther, Esther, I need you, God's people need you to go and tell the king to spare the Jews. And she thinks, I can't do that. That's what her first instinct is, I can't do that, because you could only go before the king if he asked for you. It's how crazy it is. So remember before, the last princess, she didn't come when the king wanted, so she got banished, but also you can be banished and killed if you come to the king unannounced. So she's thinking, what do I do? I could imagine she was full of fear and worry, and what do I do? What do I not do? And then Mordecai challenges her. And he says this in Esther 4:14. He says, for if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And then he says this, and it's a beautiful line. He says, and who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. And I believe that line is so relevant for us today, that we are in the places we are in. We are where we are right now for such a time as this. And eventually she agrees, I'll go before the king, but she does something first. She says, I'll go before the king, but, and this is what she says, but you must go and pray and get everyone else to pray and fast for 3 days. And after this time, I will go and talk to the king. So everyone starts praying and fasting. But here we see the fundamental key part of how we can turn grief into joy, of how we can turn worry into a blessing is this. When you are full of fear, grief and worry and facing a battle ahead of you, our first response, get this, our first response has to be to get on our knees and bring it to God in prayer. Our first response, and I'll be honest, my first response is not always that. My first response is trying to solve the problem. How am I going to do this and all this? But they're in a position they couldn't solve the problem. It was going to happen. It was signed, sealed, delivered. This is what was happening on the December the 13th. They were all going to be killed. But she inquires of the Lord. She prays and she fasts. And the first step in order to turn our pain, our grief, our fear into joy is when life challenges are ahead of us, invite God into the situation and give the battle to Him. And I was reading through the Psalms. The Psalms are a beautiful place to read when you're feeling a bit overwhelmed, or just a beautiful place to read in general. And in Psalms 55:22 it says this, cast your burden on the Lord and He will sustain you. Get that? He will sustain you. And I love this part. It says, He will never permit the righteous to be moved. He is our rock. He is our foundation. And I feel like we can embrace that today. The other thing we need to remind ourselves, no matter what we're going through, whatever we're going through, God always makes a way. God will always make a way. He is the way, the truth, and the life. He will always make a way. And in the middle of the night, guess what happens to King Xerxes? He can't sleep. And randomly what he does, he goes, what could I do? He says, he starts reading, he gets the history read to him, and he's reminded about Mordecai, how Mordecai raised the awareness and saved his life. And then, in a real nutshell, basically Mordecai gets put in great position, takes Haman's place, and God's people are saved, all because a young lady handed her worry and concern and request over to God and played her part in the process. See, the truth always comes to the surface. We don't always need to defend ourselves because the truth will always come to the surface. And the thing is also this: God is the restorer of joy and peace. And if we willingly come to Him, He will do that. God is the restorer of joy and peace if we willingly come to Him. And there's a verse for you in Psalm 27:14. It says this: wait for the Lord, be strong, and let your heart take courage. Wait for the Lord. And I feel like right now we need to be waiting on the Lord, not waiting aimlessly, but waiting intently on our knees, praying and seeking God's wisdom in this life. And this is my prayer for you, and it's a prayer, and it's found also in the Psalms. In Psalm 30:11, it says this: you turned my wailing into dancing, you removed my sackcloth and clothed me with joy. And that is my prayer, that as you bring everything, the good things and the not so good things, the challenges, to God, that He will turn your grief, your worry into joy and blessing. And just like the people in the Bible, that December 13 wasn't a day of sorrow, it was a day of joy where God's people will restore. And my prayer is that today and the next day and the day after that, that it would be a day of joy because you have put your trust and your concerns to the Lord. Bless you heaps and have a great week, and know that we'll continue to pray for you and reach out if we can help. Bless you.